Just give it one more minute and then we'll get started. Okay. Well, why don't we get going? This is our second of two community conversations that we're conducting today for the 2040 policy map. I'm getting a little bit of feedback, so if you could mute your line, that would be helpful. You should be able to just hover towards the bottom of your screen in the lower left and click the mute button. And this is part of our Charlotte Future 2040 implementation. My name is Jay Rinkins. I'm with MIG. We're a planning and design firm. We've been fortunate enough to be working with the city, with the staff, with the community over the course of the last probably 2.5 years, actually, both in the development of the comprehensive plan and now on the policy map. And I'm joined this evening by Ellie Schaefer, one of our project managers. Ellie, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Ellie Schaefer, also with MIG. I'm project manager on the consultant side for this effort.
Great, thank you, Ellie. And if you want to go to the next slide, we'll just give you a quick rundown of some of the kind of virtual meeting guidelines here. So it is helpful if you participate on a desktop computer, but if you're on a tablet or a phone, obviously you're more than welcome to participate. It just may be a little more difficult to see some of the things that we're sharing. I mentioned already, please muting your audio when you're not speaking. Try to only use one audio source, computer or phone, not both. That tends to create some reverb and feedback. Do not put your phone on hold. It's really helpful to use the mute in Zoom specifically, especially if your phone is synced to your Zoom account. That way you're not double muted. The meeting is being recorded for those of you who entered after that had started. So we're going to make those available, both the earlier conversation and this conversation. And then we just ask that you be respectful of all attendees during the session. So our agenda, we're going to give you a quick little overview of what the policy map is and a reminder of the place types, which were developed during the comprehensive plan process. Ellie is going to then give you a highlight of some of the key revisions since the first draft of the 2040 policy map. And those are included in the map that is online currently. We will let you know how you can access that. If you'd like to see that in more detail, give more detailed comments. And then we really want to open it up to sort of comments, questions. Earlier, it was really helpful to use the chat for that. But if we have an opportunity for folks to raise their hand, if they want to speak up, well, we can do that as well. And we're going to do a little bit of a choose your own adventure. We have a poll where you can indicate the topics that you're most interested in hearing about. And then we'll cover as many of those as possible based in the order of priority, and then wrap up with some next steps and some schedule highlights. So quickly on the policy map and the place types, what is the 2040 policy map? You may be familiar in the past with a future land use map. That is similar, but there are some key differences. Similar in that it is part of the overall policy guidance for the city that is established by the comprehensive plan. Folks may not know this, but the comprehensive plan that was adopted last summer is the first comprehensive plan that Charlotte has had in well over 30 years. And so it is an opportunity with this policy map to now apply some of those place-based policies to specific geographies. So we want to look at citywide direction, and we're balancing future needs and opportunities with regards to protecting priorities, while also providing strategic opportunities for growth, aligning future growth with infrastructure capacity, both infrastructure that exists today or that is planned or could be planned, and improving access to underserved areas. So to do that, we're using a palette of 10 place types. The place types were established through the comprehensive plan process. And I mentioned earlier that this is similar to a future land use designation. It does include ideas of land use, but is unique in a couple of different aspects. One, we're not talking about single sort of homogeneous land uses to, I think, almost to a place type. We do have multiple land uses allowed or encouraged within a place type. So they're inherently mixed use, although to varying degrees. And then in addition to just the uses that can occur, place types also speak to the form of the buildings and how the buildings relate to each other to create a place. The parking and mobility and other types of access that's necessary to support a place, as well as the open space and other amenities that are important to making a place complete. And so we have generally used this framework throughout the comprehensive planning process. We found it helpful in the policy mapping process as well, of thinking about these in three major categories. So live, work, and play. So live including parks and preserves, neighborhood 1 and neighborhood 2, again, mostly residential, but allowing other uses within those neighborhood types. Work being our commercial place, campus, innovation, mixed use, and manufacturing and logistics. Commercial being a pretty close semblance to some of the commercial centers, commercial strips or corridors that we have today, but with some aspirational characteristics of making them more walkable, better connected to each other, as well as to the surrounding neighborhoods. Campus includes educational campus, but also medical, office, and civic. Innovation mixed use would be typically older industrial areas that may have sort of outlived their usefulness as a manufacturing, logistics, industrial space. And so looking at creative adaptive reuse of those spaces, and then we could introduce new development within those innovation mixed use places as well. And then manufacturing logistics are largely being that traditional industrial use. And then finally, the play category includes 3 scales of mixed use activity centers. So neighborhood centers being primarily commercial restaurants, services to serve the adjacent neighborhood or neighborhoods, depending on where they're located. A community activity center being kind of a step up, including a pretty strong residential component ideally, and those serving multiple neighborhoods and probably a larger area of the city. And then regional activity centers, so really having a citywide draw, as well as perhaps a regional draw beyond the city limits with their unique aspects and the scale of development that would occur there. Ellie?
Thanks, Jay. Great, so we are on our second draft of the 2040 policy map. The first one was released in the fall, and we got a lot of community engagement on that. So based on the community engagement and sort of technical staff and stakeholder review of the first draft of the map, we've made a number of changes to the map that's currently shared online and with the community right now. So I'm just going to run through some of what those changes were, so you kind of know the difference between first time we met with the community and now, if you were in any of those conversations. And some of these also overlap with policies that we were hoping to address in the first draft of the map, and just taking a closer look, further refining the mapping methodology, and so on. So first, we had some preservation policies in the comprehensive plan. They talk about preserving existing single-family neighborhoods, as well as existing parks and public spaces. So we did a double check back into the data, really made sure that those place types are continuing in the 2040 policy map. We also kind of refined the approach to parks. So in general, you would want a small park or a plaza to be part of another place type. So we've let the smaller level neighborhood parks kind of be absorbed into maybe an activity center or neighborhood, because they can happen in those place types. But the larger parks, which are community and regional parks, and large publicly owned greenways, are now indicated as parks and preserve place type on the map. Previously, there were some utility sites like cell towers, that sort of thing, that were jumping out as a manufacturing and logistics place type, even if it was a pretty small parcel or embedded in a neighborhood. So we've kind of taken the same approach of absorbing those into their surrounding place type, just acknowledging that utilities are important in any type of place, and they don't necessarily merit a standalone place type designation. Then we looked at Uptown in particular and near light rail stations, just further looking for more opportunities to provide increased housing density near existing infrastructure, especially transportation infrastructure in the city. And then lastly, we looked at historic districts and as much as possible preserving what the existing place type was in those historic districts. So just to take a step back, the first step in our whole mapping approach here was to map what's on the ground today through the lens of place type. So we have that point of comparison. So that's really what we're looking at when we're talking about preserving different place types. Then in the work category, we took a closer look at manufacturing logistics. So in particular, near the airport, we heard from airport stakeholders and nearby neighbors that airport owned property really is most appropriate as manufacturing and logistics place type. And we also are not mapping any new neighborhood 1 or neighborhood 2 in the airport noise overlay. We just heard about the impact of that on those neighborhoods from the community. Then we also preserved large existing campuses. So again, it was a circumstance where smaller or larger campuses, like maybe a large church or a large school, were being absorbed into a surrounding neighborhood, place type, that sort of thing. But what we heard from the community is they wanted that, you wanted that distinction there. So really identifying those as a separate complete campus place when they're above a certain size threshold. Then we looked at manufacturing logistics versus innovation mixed use. So in general, innovation mixed use is often like an adaptive reuse of a historic industrial site. So we did a suitability analysis to understand where is manufacturing and logistics most feasible based on some things like building height and age, truck access, that sort of thing, and made sure to preserve manufacturing logistics in those areas because it is a really important use for the city and provides a lot of jobs. And then we targeted mixed use where that may be appropriate as well, the innovation mixed use. And then lastly, with the play categories, there was really 2 main things we did. First, we heard that the regional activity centers and community activity centers were too large overall, and people wanted more buffers between those centers and neighborhoods to be represented on the place type map. So we primarily used neighborhood 2 as much as we could to kind of reduce the size of those centers, really focus the mixed use and the intensity, that kind of critical mass of activity into a smaller area with the center, and then allowing for some housing density to buffer to surrounding neighborhoods. And then lastly, we heard a lot about there still being a good amount of small commercial areas across the city, and the community is really interested in transitioning more of those commercial areas over time to be neighborhood centers. So we really looked at strategic locations based on more prominent intersections, existing land uses, that sort of thing, to target additional neighborhood centers across the city. So that's just a high-level overview of the changes. What we really want to do, like Jay mentioned, is hear what you all want to talk about today, what your interests and concerns are related to. So we've got this poll we're going to launch, and we've got a little more background information we can give on each of these categories and give you a little background both about the comp plan policies related to that topic and the mapping that was done. And then we can kind of prioritize our conversation based on what you all want to talk about.
I should unmute if I'm trying to talk. While we're waiting, there was a question from Eric in the chat. He said the increased housing density near light rail stations was only changed for built stations and not planned, correct? And then also he followed up with, were there any thoughts about doing this around other areas to help create the 10-minute neighborhoods that were not currently near transit? So yes, in particular, I'd say we actually did, and we're working with the Silver Line team for the newer alignment that is being planned for light rail to the west and to the east of Uptown. And so those are in fact being designated for transit-oriented development. Those can take different forms. In some cases, it's innovation mixed use with neighborhood 2 surrounding it. In certain instances, it's actually still commercial, but ideally a more walkable form of commercial. And then in many instances, it is neighborhood activity center or community activity center with neighborhood 2 surrounding it, sort of in the immediate proximity, and then transitioning to neighborhood 1. And so there's also the mobility hubs idea. So beyond just stations, looking at mobility hubs around the community, and many of those can be actually embedded in neighborhoods or adjacent to neighborhoods to create greater access. And we would be trying to create additional amenities near those mobility hubs. So kind of planning, coordinating the planning. So it's not just about creating access, but also creating amenities. Great question, and great way to fill some time while people are responding to the poll. Thank you. And then just FYI, CDOT and CATS are integral in both the comprehensive planning process, which led to the adopted plan last summer, as well as the place type mapping. So there's a concurrent street types map being developed as part of the strategic mobility plan. We're also coordinating with CATS on both those future transit investments as well as mobility hubs.
I can't see the poll results for some reason, maybe because I'm co-host. Jay, can you see them?
I can, yes. So it looks like people really want to chat about housing and neighborhoods at 67%. Okay. We have housing or historic districts, excuse me, at 56%. And then we'll see how many of these we can get through, but kind of in a three-way tie with 33% is industrial and innovation mixed use places, transit-oriented development, and activity centers and mixed use places.
Oh, great.
So we're 11% in the other. So if there were any others, if you want to put those in the chat, we'll see if we can try to work those into the conversation as well. And we'll be keeping an eye on the chat as we move along here too.
And I see Martha's asking about manufacturing and logistics. That one is just kind of included in that industrial category under number 4 in the poll. So we can add a +1 to the response count for that category. I don't know how many there were for that one, but it was.
Maybe we can hit the third then in order.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, let me jump to, let's start with housing. So Jay can give just a little background on the guidance from the comprehensive plan, and then I'll just talk a little bit more about the changes and we'll open it up for conversation.
Great, thanks, Ellie. Yeah, so when it comes to housing and neighborhoods, this was probably one of the most frequently discussed topics in the plan. And I'm already seeing in the chat, some of the concerns about some of the other place types are related to housing and neighborhoods as well. So specifically on the housing and neighborhoods, some of the guidance provided by the comprehensive plan includes preserving existing areas of developed neighborhood 1. So looking for opportunities to retain neighborhood 1 kind of character as much as possible, not to say that that's kind of cast in amber. There would obviously be change within neighborhood 1 over time, but really doing so in a way that's in character with the existing neighborhoods. Looking for underdeveloped or vacant areas of neighborhood 1 to add additional density. So that's the idea that something could have been designated, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, perhaps, as neighborhood 1 has not developed. And so are there opportunities to use that to meet some of those other needs around either housing diversity or creating amenities for the nearby neighborhoods that do exist. Providing a transition between neighborhood 1 and all other place types. So wherever possible, we try to do that with the place type mapping, but obviously the vast majority of the city is in fact built out already. So sometimes that's just not a possibility. In those instances, we'd be kind of looking to the the zoning code and the development standards that will be part of that draft unified development ordinance in the future to help manage those transitions and sort of have appropriate development adjacent to neighborhood 1. Mapping larger areas of neighborhood 2 around the activity centers, we spoke to a little bit already around TOD, but that was a general approach. Mapping in neighborhood 2 near high capacity transit stations we mentioned, and then mapping pockets of neighborhood 2 along major corridors. So the idea there of really linking our transportation investment with putting more people in close proximity to whether it be transit, better vehicular connections, walking or biking.
Just a few specifics on what was done in this step of the mapping. So again, we were looking at preserving existing neighborhood 1s and large campuses. We removed any previously mapped new neighborhood 1 or 2 that was in the airport noise overlay district. And then we looked at increasing the density from N1 to N2 in Uptown, but outside of the historic district there. So if anyone has any questions, comments, concerns related to housing and neighborhoods, feel free to put those in the chat. We can start that way. Yeah, so one is, I think Martha is around the manufacturing logistics. In particular, I was looking at wanting more activity centers and TODs close to their neighborhoods. And I think there's one in particular that they're calling out. So looking around Wilkinson or in the far northwest region. So that's something that we can absolutely take a closer look at, Martha. I don't know if there's a specific, if you want to try to be more specific, and then we can, take a look at the map after the meeting and hopefully resolve that. But otherwise, other questions or concerns, thoughts about any of these revisions that Ellie gave an overview of in the neighborhood and housing category? If anyone wants to speak up, we probably have a small enough group that you could unmute and speak up, or the chat is helpful as well. And if there's nothing, we can move on to our next category, and hopefully we can hit all 5 of those high priority categories that people indicated. Mark, yeah, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to discuss this. In particular, I would like to discuss your point about changing over neighborhood 1s into campus just because campus owns it. In particular, I'd like to reference several pieces of property, excuse me, on Fountain View that are single-family residences. They were built in the 1920s. They've consistently been used for single family. They meet all the descriptions of a neighborhood 1. They were designated neighborhood 1 in the first draft, and then this small finger of houses got changed over to campus that slides down in between all neighborhood 1s, just sort of slips in. Those particular properties do not meet campus, and they shouldn't be designated as campus only because of ownership. On top of that, there is other examples that there are campus-owned facilities that were not designated campus. So it doesn't seem right that those should be designated purely for ownership and on a selective basis. I'd like for them to be reevaluated and put back and preserved, as you say, to ensure preserved existing neighborhoods as neighborhood 1.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, so we were using not just ownership, which was a consideration, but also size thresholds. And it was done as a citywide basis using, GIS. So it's an analysis, but we can take a look at the specific instance that you brought up. Thank you for mentioning that. Gretchen asked if the meeting is going to be available on the website, and I believe Maria confirmed that it is, or Gretchen did. Yes, that it is going to be available on the website. We're recording this. And then Martha followed up with some specific locations that we'll take a closer look at as well. Let's see. sorry, it's jumping around a little bit here. So Eric said, I noticed that areas that were commercial in the first draft of the policy map have changed, which is excellent, but some of those segments went to N1 or ML. Those didn't fit, and neighborhood centers make more sense. Also, I noticed areas that were N2 in the first draft have now moved to N1 and are located on major corridors. So maybe we can hit the N2 switching to N1 here, and then we'll make sure we tackle that other piece about commercial conversions in one of our other priority categories. So Ellie, do you want to speak to some of the mapping that was, map revisions that were done in looking at N2?
Yeah, so areas that were N2 that are now N1. So that's probably part of us taking a closer look at preserving existing neighborhood 1. It's possible that there were some areas that transitioned that we heard a lot of comment from the community in our last outreach that they wanted, people wanted N1 preserved. So just kind of balancing exactly where additional N2 and additional housing can go. So we're really targeting transit corridors, near transit stations in particular, and also higher density housing happens within activity centers as well. So not just in N1.
Awesome, thank you, Ellie. And Eric mentioned that he did mark that on the map. So there's an online map, and we're going to share the link to that towards the end of the meeting. So if you have specific geographies that you're concerned about, if you want to check out certain places, see or be able to compare the first draft to the second draft, you can do that on the online map. So thanks for mentioning that, Eric. Jody mentioned in 2 different comments here, why isn't there anything around the airport? Can we have a vision of maybe something like the 7th Street Station uptown? And then folks flying in Charlotte are definitely not impressed with the area near the airport. No restaurants, gas, hotels. So yeah, Jody, there are development plans. There's also place type mapping. If you look at the more detailed map, we just did not want to include residential development within those noise overlays. That's not to say that there's nothing, envisioned for around the airport. So yeah, I think that's definitely an area for improvement.
Especially with the Silver Line coming in north of the airport. There's a few transit-oriented development opportunities just north of the airport as well.
Yep, and then Alicia from staff pointed out that the airport master plan envisions a mix of uses. And then unfortunately the noise contours limit those uses. So yeah, it can't be the full mixed use like we'd envision with a community activity center, regional activity center with a whole host of housing options as well. Just because of the noise overlay, but definitely a mix of other uses. All right, Ellie, do you want to go to the next category? All right, so the next one is historic districts. So in the comprehensive plan, there's many mentions of historic districts. This is just a quick summary here. So policy direction includes retaining the identity of existing neighborhoods by intentionally redirecting or directing redevelopment, other places. Ideally, reducing the speed and scale of older homes and existing trees being demolished and replaced with newer homes within historic districts. So there's going to be some tools within the UDO suggested to that end. And then educating community members and city staff, including inspection staff, about regulations and programs that support historic preservation. One of the things that came up earlier today were questions around deed restrictions related to historic landmark designations, and whether or not the UDO in some way or the place type that are being mapped as part of the policy map would supersede those deed restrictions, and the answer is no.
So again, the main thing we did in this step of the mapping was really trying to preserve those existing place types within historic districts. There are some areas that have overlap between the pedestrian overlay and they were existing commercial within historic districts. So those have gone neighborhood activity center, which is like slightly more mixed use and walkable place type than the existing commercial. But I'm pretty sure that's really the only exception within historic districts. So definitely trying to preserve existing character. And as Jay said, historic district regulations will override any Questions, comments on historic?
Okay, Ellie, this is John Friday. Yes, I think we have real concerns. The comp plan guidance sounds pretty clear, and yet, you say that we're working to ensure existing place types in the historic district as much as possible. And then the pressure is put on basically single family homes that are in the historic district that were built in the 20s and 30s that are now labeled neighborhood 2 or something else, or maybe directly across the street have a regional activity center, not in the historic district, but 40 feet across the intersection. Are we really doing what the comp plan says? And frankly, are you guys listening to the citizens who are on the ground and close to these properties and understand the properties? I realize you're doing the entire city, but the citizen input is there's too much pressure from the policy map on the historic districts. So what can be done? We talk about provide a transition between N1 and all other place types, and you have N1 in historic district 40 feet away from a regional activity center. Really? That's disconcerting.
Yeah,
So
go ahead,
John,
Alicia.
Yeah, so John, help me understand. When you say transition, are you talking about transition in place type itself or transition in development standards that would implement the place type vision? Or maybe you're talking about both.
I am
just
talking
need to be
about
clear.
both. And the reason is, as you know, I'm very concerned that the UDO descriptions of some of the place types do not fit what we're talking about we would like to have there.
Okay.
They're too big, they're too tall, they're too close. And so that's a UDO question.
Okay.
So but
give
in
me
this
clarity
case,
on the place type question.
yeah, if you look at the Rensselaer area, for instance, which is the perfect cottage court overlay, which is a neighborhood 1 overlay, and it's called neighborhood 2, and those are very old little bungalows, that's putting pressure on destroying those and making them what neighborhood 2 could be.
So hypothetically, if there were neighborhood 1, do you think that pressure would not exist, considering that it's that close to a transit station?
I think the pressure would be an economic pressure, but
in either case, or just in one?
Let me finish. They're in the historic district.
Okay.
And everyone is counting on the fact that a volunteer group with a series of guidelines is going to tell a major developer that you have to keep this of historic character. And that is unrealistic and doesn't need to happen. In 20 years from now, if you want to redo this map, which we will do, it might be different. But right now, we're putting colors in the historic district that put pressure on that to change when we say, for instance, we should protect them from potentially adverse influences which may cause decline, decay, or total destruction of part of the city's heritage. And I think putting anything orange or purple, unless it's already taught NC, which happened, in the historic district boundaries is a mistake at this point. Now you've heard it. That's my concern. Our concern, a lot of people's concern. You have a lot of people tonight that want to talk about historic districts, so I'm going to quit talking. But those were the points that if we're looking for the UDO to manage the transitions as much, because much of the city is built out, then this policy map and the UDO need to mesh more than they do. And one or the other may need to be delayed until that stuff is figured out. My view.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Does anyone want to go next? In the meantime, I can mention a couple things in the chat. Alicia clarified that Wilkinson Boulevard is going to have community activity centers and POD. So this is jumping back to our previous topic, proposed around the stations to allow a mix of walkable uses where appropriate. And Martha had pointed out that she agreed with Jody that it looked like there was maybe still too much M and L manufacturing logistics along the new light rail line. So that's definitely something we can look at as well. Other comments, thoughts, either in the chat or if anyone wants to unmute and speak up, they can do that as well around the historic district topic. Trying to scan quickly here. We got one person saying they totally agree with John. Any other thoughts or comments? You can keep actually entering things in the chat. We can circle back to it too. But I'll give it another, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds and we can go to our next topic. Again, everything is fair game throughout the entire meeting.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Franklin, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'd like to agree with John there, and also kind of raise a bit of concern. I know Alicia has spoken to it, and we've talked about transition, both the neighborhood 1 and to the historic district, especially when the historic district is neighborhood 1, or at least that place type. I think we see along Moorhead, for one, between Lexington and Moorhead, we see regional activity centers placed directly next to neighborhood 1. It would seem that I know in the implementation strategy guide, I think it was like pages 16 and 17, you guys kind of had a matrix of preferred adjacencies. And it seems like regional activity centers are not preferred adjacency to neighborhood 1, and neighborhood 1 is not a preferred adjacency to regional activity centers. It also seems that corridor, because it's in the Midtown Moorhead Cherry Plan and the PET overlay, would be more suited for a neighborhood center. And so just kind of with those things in mind, I wasn't sure exactly how you got to regional activity center there. And also the other concern with the regional activity centers would be also in the Dilworth neighborhood along Euclid in the historic district. There are still regional activity center place types. One's on top of a single family use home right now. That would be at the corner of, I believe, Cleveland and Worthington. And it doesn't seem to be a very good transition going from regional activity center to either the historic district or the neighborhood 1 as far as the pressures on that. I think we had spoken specifically with historic district commissioners, with staff from the historic district commission when TOD was rolled out, and some of the neighborhood center or TOD NC that exists there today is because of those conversations.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll have to look at the specific instances, but generally, yeah, we were trying to, I think Ellie pointed out earlier, where possible, reduce the size or scale of some of those places. And then look at transitions, whether that be neighborhood 2 or another designation. So again, I can't speak to the specific locations. We'll have to take a look at those after the meeting over the coming days with the staff, but that's something that we can look at. One of the things that we are taking into consideration are existing zoning designations, existing development. And I'm not saying that explains exactly the instance that you're bringing up or those particular situations, but we are trying to balance both entitlements, existing development, as well as what is, kind of the ideal in terms of, like you said, looking at ideal adjacencies or preferred adjacencies, those to avoid, that sort of thing. So all really great points. Thank you, Franklin.
I have one question. Are you guys working specifically with the Historic District Commission and while you're kind of going through the changes of the next map?
No, we work with the Historic District staff as in Christy Harts, that's on our team, and Monica Holmes. But the Historic District Commission, to my understanding, and as part of the memorandum of understanding, there is no policy development purview for that group.
Thank you, Lisa. That's what I meant.
But we will present to them just as information so they can know what is happening and be aware of the conversations. But that's about it. But we're working with Christy Harps on our team.
Awesome. Thank you, Franklin, and thank you, Alicia, for the response. Other comments, questions, whether we can add them to the list, places to look at, or other sort of types of things you're seeing on the map, if you'd had a chance to look at it, that are either raising concerns or that you like. We like hearing that too sometimes. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone trying to unmute or raising their hand. So again, no topic is out of bounds. So if you want to provide more comments on historic districts or on the neighborhood and housing topic that we covered first, feel free to do so in the chat. But we'll move forward with our next one in order, which was industrial and innovation mixed use places. So the guidance from the comprehensive plan largely focused on mapping or infilling manufacturing logistics in areas that already have this place type and the supporting infrastructure, adding workplace types in areas most lacking access to employment opportunity. So in some cases that was innovation mixed use. In some instances, although more limited, manufacturing logistics were identified as some of those work opportunities to get employment closer to where people live. Mapping workplace types within a half mile of trail access points and high performance transit stations. That's part of the goal around transit oriented development and trail oriented development. So obviously doing something that's compatible with the transit station and or the trailhead, but trying to put more employment opportunities as well as housing opportunities close to those transportation amenities. And then considering historic industrial areas for transition to innovation mixed use through adaptive reuse and infill. I think we spoke to that a little bit earlier already, but generally that's this idea that there is a kind of newer model of manufacturing and logistics based on floor to ceiling heights, based on access, based on the construction of those buildings and equipment. So there may be opportunities to do some adaptive reuse for some of those.
And I think we've already kind of covered what changes we did to the mapping related to this topic, so I won't repeat myself. But again, just a overarching note that manufacturing logistics does provide a lot of valuable jobs to the city. So it's seen as a really valuable place type, and in a city that's largely built out, we see opportunities for manufacturing logistics, industrial uses tending to disappear. So that's part of the background on the policy to provide manufacturing logistics in the city, just an important piece of the economic puzzle that we're balancing.
Yeah, and I think circling back on some of the chats while waiting for more comments maybe to come in, Eric, I'll call on you in 1 second. Martha did indicate that she thought that there might be too much manufacturing logistics along the new light rail to the west. I do know that we are looking at tackling some of those and have tried to in the revision, looking at opportunities to make some of that innovation mixed use, as well as neighborhood center and some of our other place types.
In fact, with this second version, though, you went from innovation mixed use to manufacturing.
You accidentally muted, Martha. You said went from innovation mixed use to, and then it got muted.
To manufacturing and logistics. So the Wilkinson corridor, for example, had been primarily innovation mixed use in the first draft. And then our community, the Northwest Community Alliance, indicated that we'd like to see, neighborhood centers, with transit-oriented development at more of the major intersections. And I just make the point that if you look at the map, the entire west of I-77 is purple and the east of I-77 is much less so. So I understand the attraction of jobs, but in some ways the west and northwest is being penalized for having open space that's still available for this type of massive development. But the reality is that type of open space is an enormous resource to the entire county, not just as equally as much so as jobs would be. So I think that at least having community-oriented development in the form of innovation mixed use at a minimum, rather than fully manufacturing and logistics, so that those types of uses can be interspersed together with uses that the community will use. As another example, look at the density between Independence and say 85, and that sort of eastern corridor, the density of neighborhood centers compared to the comparable size and distance from uptown corridor between like 85 and 16. I mean, there's, I'd say 2 to 3 times as many neighborhood centers. So we really are lacking in community space, and we're a food desert. I think there needs to be more planning in order to take advantage of attractions like the Whitewater Center. Right now, I literally made reservations for a group, like Jody was saying, at the airport hotel, and then I proceeded to drive down Wilkinson, and there wasn't nothing that my guests could do all the way to Belmont. So we deserve more than that, I think, in far west Charlotte.
All right, thank you, Martha. Appreciate that. We'll definitely be taking a look at that area. Eric, do you want to go next?
Sure, thank you. It's similar to Martha, but a little bit closer in. Some of the manufacturing logistics on West Moorhead, Wilkinson Boulevard, and there's some even on Summit Avenue that I think most of them were commercial at one point in the process, and then they were converted to ML, which doesn't really make much sense. I know about the creating jobs where people live, but that place type isn't good for walkability. So I think the innovation mixed use would make more sense, especially closer in and closer to light rail stations too. So I marked most of those on the map as well, so you have them.
Awesome, thank you, Eric. I'm gonna hit one from the chat and then we'll go to April. Someone asked if there was consideration for adding live workspace in the innovation mixed use. Could there be artist studios that also have space for residential quarters, first floor retail with upper floor residential? Yes, the innovation mixed use does in fact kind of envision that as part of that place type. And then April, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'll go next. Good evening, everyone. Martha, you're right. You 100%. I do the same thing. When I'm getting folks from coming from the airport, friends, family, for whatever I'm doing here in Charlotte, it's like a dry county. So I think if there's a good focus on, it's already like a little city on the inside of the airport, but once you get so far into the area, the west side there's nothing there. There's barely places to eat for those who, let's say, when you have layovers, and you want to get outside the airport. There's only like maybe 3, maybe 4 hotels and motels, but I think if the focus can be shifted a little bit, if we're gonna spend a lot of time trying to develop something, that whole core order right there needs to have something that's more suitable and living affordable if you're gonna do some housing as well there for those that are moving into Charlotte. The leading from the airport all the way downtown, it should be banging. It should have some good site right there. But I think there's a whole lot of development that does need to be done right there by the airport. So Martha, you get a 100 plus for that.
Great, thank you, April. Martha also mentioned a specific location that we can take a look at. And Martha, if you haven't already, we will be posting the link. It sounds like you might be looking at the map, so please, put comments on there. Jody supported that the Whitewater Center is amazing, but it's in the shadows of industrial. I think those were all the chats right now. Anyone else want to speak up about the manufacturing logistics or innovation mixed use designations and how you're seeing them show up or not show up on the map? No, okay. Do we have a next one in order, Ellie?
Yeah. We're on TOD.
John pointed out that he agrees with Martha and asked that we look at the gold district as well. Great, thanks, John. So on TOD, I mentioned that there's a goal and a whole set of strategies and policies in the comprehensive plan around supporting transit-oriented development. So some of the specific guidance there is to ensure place type mapping is consistent with previously completed TOD zoning. So some people may be aware of this, but the new TOD zoning, which was adopted, I think, a year and a half, maybe even 2 years ago now, was the first piece of the UDO to be developed and adopted. So since that was sort of running concurrently with the comprehensive planning process, there was an intent on using that really detailed community input to make sure the place type mapping then kind of jived with the TOD zoning designations. And then the second piece was adding neighborhood 2 along major transportation corridors, really of all types, but particularly those with transit lines.
Great. So yeah, on the first version of the map, we were working closely with the TOD team to make sure that that zoning was reflected. In this version, we took a closer look in immediate proximity to high capacity transit stations. There's a lot of neighborhood 1 that we're trying to preserve. So really targeting opportunities for higher density residential in areas that are within, about a 5-minute walk distance from a high capacity transit station. So that's the main change related to TOD on this version of the map.
So we've talked a bit about TOD, I think, throughout the meeting, but if there's other comments about the transit stations, about those mobility hubs that I mentioned earlier, the types of places we'd like to see around those, this would be the opportunity. And I did see your recognition, Martha, of a change that you did like from map 1 to map 2. Thanks for throwing that in the chat. Okay. How many, do we have many more, Allie?
Just the last one, and I want to say like a minute or two for next steps, but activity centers was the last one.
Okay, well, why don't we hit it? So I'll try to be fast. So the plan guidance from the adopted comprehensive plan was to grow regional activity centers, but put more emphasis on well-distributed neighborhood centers and commercial corridors. I think we're hearing this evening that the size of the regional centers needs to be highly considered, particularly when they're adjacent to neighborhoods. So in some of those instances, I think we've tried to already in the revision, but maybe there's a need to examine a little bit more, convert some of those to neighborhood centers and commercial corridors or community activity centers for that matter. Mapping new activity centers of all scales and expand existing activity centers. So one of the big things that we heard from community members is that they desired this sort of 10-minute neighborhood idea, whether it be walking, biking, or by transit. So it actually covers a pretty good distance, but when we mapped that using the equitable growth framework metrics, there were a lot of gaps across the community. Looking at adding activity centers along major transportation corridors, it makes sense if that's where we're making investment in moving people more efficiently. So having activity centers along those, converting some areas of commercial and campus places to activity centers. So looking at those that have potential to maybe introduce more walkability, a greater mix of uses, and then adding new community and regional activity centers in areas that currently lack access to goods and services. So I kind of mentioned that above in terms of just filling some of those gaps.
And again, I think we've kind of talked about these ones, but we can take a closer look at those transitions between regional activity center and N1 that's noted on here, and also a closer look at the scale of, I think, regional activity centers in particular. And then we again looked at revising certain targeted locations from commercial to neighborhood center.
Great. So with that, I think why don't we go to our next steps and hit the schedule? We are going to be, in addition to recording this meeting, we are exporting the chat. So if you have additional thoughts, comments, questions, please put them in there. But Ellie's also going to talk about additional opportunities to provide comments.
Yeah, so our public review period is open through next Tuesday, February 8th. So we've captured everything from today, but also feel free to go leave more specific comments on the online map. That's cltfuture2040.com. You can also call in to 704-336-2205 and speak to someone and provide voice comments. And then we have our email address as well, where we're gathering comments. That's cltfuture2040@charlottenc.gov. When you go to the online map, this is what the landing page looks like. So you're going to want to click on this orange view map here button. That'll take you to the map that looks like this. I'll point out on the top right where the legend is, there's a like stacked looking icon, and that'll let you turn on and off layers on the map. So you can see each individual parcel that changed from the first draft, and it has a reason why associated with it. The circles are identifying sort of bigger areas of change. That's just a little bit easier to read if you're zoomed out. And then there's some helpful context layers as well, like light rail and historic districts. And if you click on anything on the map, a pop-up window will appear, and you can kind of scroll in that little zoom bar to see all the information in there, including existing place type, current designations, and any other information that is in there. And then our next steps. So again, our public comments open through the 8th. On the 7th, we have a planning commission update of just about what we've heard so far in the community engagement. We're working on kind of gathering all that and revising the methodology. And we should have a revised final recommended map out on February 21st. So that'll be released through social media, on the city website, those normal channels. On the 28th, there's a city council public comment session. So there's a chance to look at the map before that. And then we'll be going for hopeful adoption of the map in March. So first going to planning committee for a recommendation, and then on the 15th, and then city council for adoption on the 28th. So about 2 months left anticipated in the process at this point. So that's all we had. Thanks everyone so much for coming and providing your comments, and feel free to put anything else in the chat you might want before you jump off.
Great. I saw, Mark, you put in just to reiterate that Fountain View Properties issue. Thank you. If anyone else wants to do that, we will export that chat and make sure that gets entered into our log of all the different comments we've been hearing. But yeah, as Ellie said, thank you so much for your time this evening. It's really great to be able to hear from you directly. We will be looking at the map and all of those comments as well. But it's nice to hear from some folks via other means other than that mapping process. But thanks so much and have a great night.